Round 7 of the candidates has just finished. Now the players were back from a rest day, they were fighting fit. We saw 2 decisive results today. I'm looking at one of them in this game and it featured really a shocking decision which we'll see play out here. Now I'm hoping I'm not sounding too knackered tonight. I've just caught up on these games. I was actually playing chess myself this afternoon, so I'm quite tired after that. But I am back home now. I was on holiday this week. I'm back in my usual setup. And I wanted to mention, I forgot to earlier in the week, that it's actually been a year since I started this epic chess channel. So I started it on the 23rd of June. It's been going for over a year now. And I just want to say a big thank you for all the support from everyone. I hope you're enjoying these videos. Thanks for the comments, the likes, everything like that. It really is appreciated. And if you do want to donate to the channel, keep on supporting all of these videos, then you can do so via the link below or using the super thanks. And as always, thanks very much for that. So kicking on with the game here, Rapport kicks off with pawn to e4 and Jan goes for this super solid Petrov, which we've seen him playing, knight f3, knight f6, we had takes on e5, pawn d6, and now after the knight comes back, once again we go down these classical lines with pawn to d4, d5, but now after bishop d3, we don't get bishop e7 here, we don't get bishop f5, all this stuff with the knight coming to c6. Instead, Jan goes for this bishop d6 setup, the so-called Marshall attack. Now after bishop d6, we had castles from black, pawn c4 striking at the centre, and after c6 defending, here Rapport goes for a really offbeat line. So more commonly you see queen to c2, knight c3, things like that. But we had queen to b3, immediately pressuring on these white squares here. And now Jan responds with one of the sharpest responses here. He doesn't take on c4, for example. He goes bishop to g4, just leaving this pawn to be taken here. But he was very much in his prep, blitzing out these moves. Now, if you take on b7 here, black actually gets a massive attack after bishop takes on f3. I mean, if you keep chopping material, like taking the rook, well, then we have takes on h2 with the bishop. You just crash through. Say you capture that one, the queen comes in. You're actually checkmating like this. And if instead of taking the bishop, you move the king to the side, well, once again, the queen comes in. This is completely devastating. So you can't take the rook in the corner after taking the pawn. Equally, if you took the bishop back, you have yet more problems with the queen coming in. I won't go through all the lines here, but it's just not good for white. So that's why the pawn wasn't captured on b7. Instead, the knight was taken on e4, eliminating one of those attacking pieces. And you also open up the queen to laterally defend here. So the pawn recaptured on e4. Rapport now goes knight g5, attacking that e4 pawn. But Jan now blitzes out this move. He's in his preparation. He just drops the bishop back to e7, hits this knight. But more importantly, he now opens up the queen to attack this pawn. So after knight takes on e4, he snaps off here. Now Rapport does take on b7, and here's what Jan's got worked out. He's going to take on e4, Rapport chops here, wins an exchange, and is a pawn ahead. But here's a really nice piece of prep now from the Pomniachi. He goes bishop h3, threatening mate on g2, and that one has to be taken. If you try pawn f3 defending the mate, well, then the queen comes to e2. Once again, you're threatening mate and you just can't stop it. Say you go like this one, for example. Well, the problem is the bishop coming to c5. So you could check here, the rook drops back, then you check again. And basically in all of the lines, none of it's working for white. It's just leading to checkmate by force. So you can't go f3. The bishop was taken. And now we had this queen g6 check. And we're actually just heading for a repetition here. We thought the game would be ending, but Rapport decides to actually play on for just a moment. So here he goes pawn to f3. Now this is still playable. You can still lead this to a draw because queen d3 hits this rook here. It was defended by the king. Then it was checked again. King h1, the queen comes back. Once again, a draw offer from Jan. But now Rapport makes a really surprising decision. He decides to play on in this position. He's already about an hour down on the clock here as well. And he goes knight to d2. but this is just a really bad practical decision. The big problem here is that white's actually going to lose the queen, and then the black queen is going to be better than the two rooks. So we'll see this in action in a moment. The queen drops to d7 here. It's trapping in the white queen because it now covers this pawn. The knight is about to move. Knight e4 was played. Now this knight developed, and here the queen has nothing better but to give itself up, and black is now better because of all of these weaknesses around the white king here. So the bishop now developed here, just to show you why white doesn't go king g2 to protect this pawn, which Jan takes in a moment. Well, then you can go queen to d4, you attack the c4 pawn, and there's no b3 or you lose your rook in the corner. So that's why the bishop just developed, connected the rooks, but the queen now snapped off here. This rook came to the d file, and one of the big challenges for white is that this rook is actually tethered down to the protection of this pawn, and this rook is tethered down to the protection of this one, so it can't actually activate. So h6 now played by Jan. This bishop drops back to g3, covers the f3 pawn, prepares to free up the rook. Knight c5 now from Nepo, and we didn't have a captures here. If that had happened, the bishop bounces in. The big challenge here for white is that the pawns will soon be coming too, and if this one lands on, say, h3, then the queen moves. You can have lots of checkmating threats around the white king. That's why this is just so difficult for white to play now. So after knight c5, we had the rook coming to e1 here. The knight now drops back to e6. It's looking at f4. Pawn to a3 played, and now pawn h5 from Nepo. He gets that one going. The rook came to d3, protecting this pawn, anticipating h4, and now Nepo didn't play it immediately because then the knight can drop back to f2. You hit the queen. After it moves away, well, you can then take the pawn. Now the line goes on here, there's some tactical stuff going on, but still it wouldn't have been great for black to play like this. So instead of pushing h4 prematurely, the queen dropped back to f5, and now pawn b4 was played, taking some space. Pawn h4 from Nepo, and again you can't capture this pawn because then you give up the f4 square for the knight, and in combination with the queen there's just too many problems here. I mean, say for example you move the rook here to hold the pawn on f3, well then we can come to h3, we're threatening mate, we're hitting the bishop, and there's many lines like that, tactical ones, where white just gets overloaded and can't hold everything together. So that's why the pawn wasn't captured. The bishop came to b8 here, and now knight g5 played, simply looking to exchange pieces, and you can't actually take that one yet or you lose your rook on d3. So instead this rook came to e3 here, doubling, protecting the knight, and now Nepo doesn't take here. That would be a blunder because then rook f1 comes, pinning the knight, winning that piece. So instead he just takes on e4, very simple stuff. The rook doesn't recapture or you lose this pawn, so instead the pawn captured. Now queen f2 played, and it's just such an annoying move. You can't kick with this rook, or then you actually get mated in one. If you kick with this rook, well then we come to f3 with check, king g1, pawn h3, and here's that terrible pawn I was mentioning, creating all of these mating problems. Really tough for white here. So that's why h3 was played by Rapport, trying to stop the black pawn coming to that square. And now bishop e7 was played, simple developing moves, and Rapport's time is just so low at this point. That's his other big problem here. So the bishop now came to h2, looking to bounce back to g1. Bishop g5 from Nepo, hits the rook. Bishop g1 was played, kicks the queen out of there, it came across to d2, and now this rook dropped back from the attack, hits the queen, it came to d3, and now from here it's attacking these two pawns, also looking at the e4 pawn, and you just can't hold everything together. So bishop e3 was played, looking to actually block the queen's attack here, but now Nepo simply played bishop f6, a lovely retreating move. He doesn't even capture on e4 with check yet. Instead he asked white, how are you going to defend everything here? And right on the time control, Rapport takes on a7, but this allows Nepo to crash through on h3 with check. We had king g1, queen g3, king f1, and now pawn to h3. This one's marching down the board. So the bishop dropped back, covered this square, but now bishop h4 was actually the final move of the game. Here Rapport resigned. Why did he resign? Well, you're about to either queen this pawn or give some kind of checkmate. I mean, say for example you go pawn b5, you start trying to get something going, well then we can check here, you're forced to block with a piece, and then this one can get chopped, recaptures with the bishop, the pawn's going through. There's lots of different lines like that, you just can't protect the king. So Nepo now leads the tournament, sole leader. We've got Fabiano chasing, he beat Timur Radjabov. Radjabov made this strange decision to castle queenside, then he was worse. And then we had a draw between Alireza Firouzja and Ding Liren, and Hikaru Nakamura, Jan Krzysztof Duda, they also drew their game. So it's hotting up now, but Jan and Fabiano are really out ahead. So we need some upsets soon from the lower players to topple those guys at the top, make it a bit more interesting. Thanks very much for watching. If you want to see another amazing game by Jan Nepomniachtchi, click here.